really look and get into the textures instead of being able to read right away what's going on. And I think the next one is a shot of the side of this same piece. Thank you. So I, just going back to bringing in the wall, since I've been here in my studio with less access to supplies, I've been working with what I have, so had moved away from the cutouts like you saw in the first piece, but I'm still trying to address the piece not just as a plane to draw on or to paint on, but addressing the 3D shape that is the panel. And this is just on a birch gessoed panel, but trying to bring the piece around the edges so that it really interacts with the material that it's on instead of just existing separate from the material world. Can you go to the next slide, please? And this, I apologize, is a little blurry image. It's the same idea. This one is all oil stick and charcoal, no spray paint. And this piece was just trying to focus in on specific shapes and really noticing the ways that the identifiable shapes or subjects interact with their background. I've always loved Van Gogh's sunflower paintings, not necessarily for the flowers, but the way that the background moves around each leaf and petal. So I was finding a lot of inspiration from that interaction of background and subject, and thinking about where there is that contrast between the identified object and its context or surroundings and where they might blend together. And it's a little bit of a space with a floor there and the two figures, but also again just exists as kind of exploring shapes. I never try to make a specific scene while I'm working, but afterwards I look and think, oh yes, that's two people sitting looking at a tent or something. It's easy to, I tend to read objects into my work after the fact, but this was mostly kind of focusing on the edges and where the known identified object meets that unknown changeable context. And then I think there's a couple more. Okay. We'll click to the next. This one is Snake, playing around with having a more identifiable object. This was also just recently made during quarantine with little leftover bits of charcoal and India ink and Conte crayon and graphite, and having that initial squiggle transform into a somewhat defined object or animal. But it's still heading both ways. It's still a little bit confused and kind of could be going in either direction and just heading into this undefined space around it that's left open to the viewer's interpretation of where you think that may be. And this one has oil, crumbled up oil stick pressed on top of the charcoal and ink to give it, I don't know if you can zoom in to the top right area there. There's a fairly high relief texture of the oil stick and charcoal rising up on top of the other materials that it's pressed onto. So I try to keep the drawn shadows having some relationship to real shadows from the relief of the work.
Okay. Next.
Yep. Thank you. And this is, for me, a lot of color in my work with the yellow. Thinking about, okay, now that we have these unknowns and these undefined things, I think it's really beautiful, that moment when we see something and realize that we don't understand it, and we can then try to understand and kind of make sense of whatever is in front of us. So this is, I was thinking of the yellow as sort of a beam of sight, looking out into this muddy ground and trying to define it, and in effect highlighting all the little bits and pieces that make it not a totally blank space, but show that there is something going on. I'm a big believer in nothing actually being blank or kind of background. Everything has its value and its details. You just have to look closely enough. So this is that searching light, just starting to gaze into the rough unknown, or the interesting unknown, whichever way you want to see it. And I think there's a quick little video as my last one. I don't know if it's possible to share a video. Ah, perfect. So this is just
Well, here you go.
Great, thank you. This is not quite finished. I think this is going to end up in a larger sculpture or possibly pasted into another piece. But this is a small 5x7, I think, drawing on Yupo with graphite and India ink and charcoal, all my favorite dark materials. And I just wanted to show the video so that you can see how, as it moves and the light hits it different ways, it changes from looking very light to very dark. And I try to keep that present in some way in a lot of my work, whether it's how it's lit during an exhibition or having some elements of relief with a shadow or some metallic graphite, so that it changes a little bit as you're walking around, from looking from different angles, and trying to bring that process of looking into the experience of the work. And